it was explained logically that they bundled up these 3 visas and we didn't have any problem with those visas, you know, the 457 visas, where there aren't the skills in the country. Once that was clarified and we moved through the guff of mines and metals, they were as good as gold.
All right, Paddy Crumlin from the Maritime Union, thank you very much.
Thanks, mate.
We can go now to the industry's response, and we're joined from Brisbane by Scott Barklamb. He's the Executive Director of the Australian Mines and Metals Association. Scott Barklamb, you've heard probably what's been said there. What's your reaction to that with Paddy Crumlin's comments?
Well, we can see why the PUP senators and why Labor and the Greens have made such a terrible mistake here. Paddy's entirely on the wrong boat, and let me pick up that piece of thinking there. This is about boats. It's not about rigs. It's about a small number of a very limited set of internationally specified vessels, of which there are only a handful on the globe. They come to Australia on an annual sailing program or a program going to Mexico, going to Canada, going into Europe, and they come here. When they come here, they overwhelmingly create jobs for Australians. On our understanding, 3 to 4 Australian jobs for every international worker. When the international workers come here, and they've been coming here for more than 2 decades to do this pipelay work, when they come here, they do so in accordance with international law and practice, the same as any other country. They come here and are paid in accordance with EU rates of pay from their home port, which is what the international maritime law dictates. This is a complete misrepresentation of what goes on in the industry. Labor forced this visa requirement on the industry against our wishes last year. The regulation that Paddy's talking about is the Coalition's attempt to make a bad piece of Labor legislation work. And what we saw last night, and this is an absolutely critical point, Tony, to get through to you and the viewers today, what we saw last night is not the very limited action that Paddy describes to you. Even if he was entirely correct, what was done last night is many times more damaging than he indicates. Every single 457 visa worker in our offshore oil and gas industry as of today have their work rights invalidated or rendered uncertain.
How so?
Because the scope of legislation that Labor passed last year takes in not just the ships they were trying to get at to do a favour for the MUA, who we think don't like these workers because they don't join the union, don't pay their dues and don't march to their tune. The scope of what was drafted last year impacts on every rig, every driller, every vessel, both those close to Australia, employing overwhelmingly Australians, and those out in the extended economic zone.
Scott Barklamb, if there are such a small number involved here, what's the problem with them being on a different visa and paid the right wages and conditions similar to other workers?
Well, let me firstly correct one thing. They are paid the right wages in international terms. As we understand it, they are comparable to those of Australian workers. They don't, Tony, when these ships enter our migration zone, when they work in Australian waters, they do use 457 visas and do pay Australian rates of pay. When they're in international waters, they observe international practice, but there is no sense in which these workers are low paid or vulnerable.
Do you know why the PUP senators and Ricky Muir joined the Greens and Labor to vote this measure down?
I unfortunately was not able to speak to the Greens senators and Senator Muir in the last 24 hours. If I had, perhaps I would have been able to put some more of these facts before them. Really, they need to speak to themselves, but I can say to you that we saw in Parliament last night 2 informed speeches from Senator Michaelia Cash, the Assistant Minister for Immigration, and Senator Chris Back from Western Australia, who knows our industry. And we saw 2 absolutely ill-informed speeches from the Greens and the Palmer United Party, and the contrast was striking. And if I can issue one call or if I can express one piece of disappointment, the senators didn't listen to each other last night, and that's why we saw a very difficult situation which has created something of a train wreck which our industry now needs to try and clean up with the government.
All right, just very quickly, if you would, Scott Barklamb, why is it so essential that these workers work and not upset what Michaelia Cash has called thousands of jobs and disrupting the offshore oil rig business?
Now, that's a great question. This is a very small but essential part of the mega resource projects which are bringing billions and billions of dollars to our country. By far the overwhelming work is undertaken by Australians and Australian residents and a very small number of 457 visa holders within our territorial waters.
But it's not going to stop as a result of last night's vote, is it?
Well, that's the risk. Everybody who works with or relies upon the employment of a 457 visa worker, as of today, has uncertainty. And I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to stir up a panic. We think we will be able to find a solution to this, and we're working with the government to do so. But have a look at the speech of Senator Cash in the Parliament last night. It's not a word of exaggeration. This is a serious migration problem, which Mr Crumlin has walked the Palmer United Party and in particular the Greens and Labor into.
Scott Barklamb, Executive Director of the Australian Mines and Metals Association. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you.
Pleasure.
Coming up, a French cyclist wins the 11th stage of the Tour de France. More on that in sport with Peter Wilkins next.
Then, who is the Adelaide singer and songwriter making history as her debut album